I guess we'll kind of just jump right into it. David, can you see me at all?
Yeah, I can see you. I can hear you. Everything's great.
Charming as ever. Basically, as I mentioned before, this is a fireside chat. So just a couple of quick questions that I have, but then we'll be turning it over to folks in the crowd. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free. So I just want to do a brief introduction. I think David will actually do a little bit more introducing on his own as we kind of go through, but I want to just say, David is the founder of Weebly. Who is familiar with Weebly? Right, many of you, right? Who has actually used Weebly? Right, a bunch of you, which is awesome, right? So the founder, right? That's crazy. Very infrequently do we get to meet somebody who's actually created and built something, especially something with a wide impact. After founding Weebly, he went to go be a GM of e-commerce at Square. Who's familiar with Square, right? Yeah, heavy hitter up here, which is awesome, right? Oh, Square, the thing most people use. And then finally, and now currently, David, if this is still true, founder and the MP of Leap Forward Ventures. Is that the venture capital VC?
That's right.
So, climate and tech and energy transition venture fund that focuses on investing in those types of companies. So an incredible person. So hopefully you have lots of questions. So David, I want to just ask, when you go to a party and someone asks you what you do, what do you say?
So first of all, before jumping in that, just want to say I hope to be there in person, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But still really happy to be joining virtually. So to get to your question, these days it would be former software entrepreneur that is now full-time in climate tech as a venture capitalist.
That's awesome. I mean, what I love is the diversity of responses. So some people say, I just did a thing, and then other people say, like, that's exactly this. That's amazing. How did you come up with the idea for Weebly, and what inspired you to create a website building platform? Of all of the things you could have done with your computer science background, your intellect, and your time, why Weebly?
So I actually had an IST background, just to be extra precise about that. Wasn't in the CS program. As part of it was my junior year. I believe the class was IST 402. And it was Dr. Santora's class, who I believe is now retired. And the goal of the class was to create a web app. It was really simple. It was really open-ended. And I was running a different company at the time that I had started in high school, which was a managed secure email company. And so I wasn't really thinking that I was interested in starting another company. And as part of that class, originally the idea was, at the time when I was going to Penn State, there was a requirement that all students create an online e-portfolio, basically just a website that was a resume or something like that. And so I thought, hey, maybe I'll make it easier for students to create an e-portfolio. So it started off for the first maybe 3 or 4 days as an e-portfolio creator, and very quickly realized, hey, there's the potential to do a lot more than just e-portfolios. In fact, we could help people create all forms of websites. And that was really the origin of the idea. Worked on it all that semester as part of the class. I, was interning that summer at Merrill Lynch. One of my co-founders interning at GE, the other one at MTV, and we're all around the New York area. Ended up working for 3 straight weeks between the semester and my summer internship in my apartment in Beaver Hill. I was 116 Beaver Hill. Pretty much worked 24/7. Would work about 16 to 20 hours straight, sleep for about 8 or 9 hours, go get a slice of Canadian pizza and keep working. So did that for about 3 weeks, worked nights and weekends over the summer. And then that fall we applied to Y Combinator, ended up leaving school a semester early. So we moved out to San Francisco in January, which was really leaving our last semester senior year. We all 3 of us found a way to graduate on time or a little bit delayed. But that was it. We grew Weebly from what was originally a place to create websites to a place to create all forms of websites for businesses, to eventually primarily focus on e-commerce and online stores. And that, when we refocused the company in that direction is when the combination with Square made a whole lot of sense.
That's awesome. At what point did you know, or did you think that this might have bigger legs than maybe just a class project? What was that inflection point like for you folks?
Yeah. By the end of that class, it was in a very early prototype stage, but it felt like there could be something bigger. By the end of that summer, when we applied to Y Combinator, we had gotten written up in TechCrunch and, had launched to a very limited set of people, and that felt like maybe there's something bigger here. at that point in time, it was still a huge leap of faith to leave school a semester early and not graduate and move out to San Francisco. That April, Stephen Levy, this will really date me and the story. Stephen Levy wrote a big article on Y Combinator, the very first sort of major, long form piece on YC in Newsweek, the magazine, that was at that point in time still published and in circulation. So that gives you a little bit of idea how long ago that was. And he wrote a big piece on Y Combinator, and we were featured in it. And I ended up graduating on time. I flew back to State College to graduate, and could go down to McClanahan's and pick up a Newsweek magazine and see ourselves in it. And that was kind of a moment when we thought, okay, maybe there's something a lot bigger here.
That's totally wild. And speaking of like kind of growth and like thinking you might have something, there was an article I was reading. It was a 2008 LA Times article that was on you folks. And it said that basically there were 3 of you, you were looking for a 4th, and there were, I think, 600,000 users at that time. Since grown, right? 350 employees when you basically was acquired by Square. But at that moment, there were 4 of you. That's 2 bunk beds worth of people, and managing over 500,000 users. What was that like? And after dealing with something like that, what do you sweat about now?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there was 4 of us all the way until we were maybe 1 or 2 million users. We answered all the customer support requests ourselves for the first couple million. And these days I suppose you just have ChatGPT do it, but back then we had to actually write them ourselves. And yeah, I mean, it was manageable. It was a lot of work. We kind of kept the same schedule when we moved out to San Francisco. We would our typical working business hours were between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 a.m. We'd go to bed at 8 a.m., sleep as long as we needed to, wake up at 5, rinse and repeat, kind of working all of our waking hours, except for Saturdays. We always took Saturday off to make sure that we wouldn't burn out. But just with a whole lot of work and a whole lot of luck, we were able to manage it.
That's totally wild. I can't even, the idea that like 600,000 people is more than all of the people that come here during football weekends. So a sea of people all using your products and trying to manage that. That's incredible. With the acquisition of Weebly by Square, what did it feel like for you? So this was your baby. You had been building this for years with your team. What did it feel like to make that transition, to basically have that phase change from it's yours to now you're handing it over to somebody else?
Yeah, I use the same unit of measurement, by the way, which is 1 Beaver Stadium. Whenever I think about the number of people, you think about 1 million people, that's like 10 Beaver Stadiums. So I conceptualize, it's just hard to imagine that many people. But what did the acquisition feel like? We've gotten to the point where, Weebly had started off with online commerce, and we were getting into in-person commerce. And Square had started off with in-person commerce and was extremely successful and wanted to expand into online commerce. And I think what both of us were hearing from our respective set of customers was that one or the other wasn't good enough. And the direction things were going is that you needed to be able to do both. You needed to be able to bring them together, what people oftentimes call omni-channel. And that's the direction the world was going. And both of us sort of at roughly the same time realized that the real potential and the real future was in bringing those both together. And so, I think, in terms of the feelings and the emotions, it was very positive. And, I think it was this feeling of being able to take something that we had spent at that point, I think 12 years building, and the team was about 350 people at that point. And, joining forces with a larger, but very much culturally aligned, mission aligned organization, to be able to accomplish something greater together. So overall, hugely positive feeling. And the 3.5 years where I was at Square were very positive years for me personally, but as well as I think professionally in terms of what we were able to accomplish and help move the industry forward and especially accomplish for our customers.
That's incredible. I love that. One of the questions I have is more of a personal one, just kind of hearing about your background. What is your superpower? Like, what is the thing that you're incredible at? Because we all have some kind of version of an unfair advantage. What would be your superpower that you've noticed?
That's a good question. I think one superpower may be the ability to join the technical side with the people side,
Yeah.
and to be able to take complex subjects and try to distill them down and communicate them simply. I think there's a lot of opportunity that's created at the intersection of disciplines, and there's a lot of opportunity for people who can simplify, and take something that may take most people who are in the weeds. It may take 5 or 10 minutes to explain the concept. There's a lot of power in being able to take that concept. If you truly master a concept, you should be able to explain it in 5 seconds to a 5th grader.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think I come from a biology background, and seeing some similarities in entrepreneurship where it's between the two places. So like oak savanna, where it's like woods, but not quite grasslands, where you see those really fertile areas. So for you, the space between being very technical, but also being able to communicate between places, I think that makes a ton of sense. That's awesome. How have your relationships changed with your two co-founders, initially Dan and Chris, over the years? And the reason I ask this question is we see a lot of teams that start with, they have a particular group of friends that they work with, and they're like, it's going to be like this forever. It's going to be you, me, and ramen, and we're going to stink, and we're going to code, and it's just going to be like that forever, without kind of thinking about some of how things changed in the long term. For you, what was that relationship or those relationships like as Weebly grew and changed and kind of it got acquired?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We started off by moving out to San Francisco together. We were 3 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. And we lived and worked with each other 24/7. And it was a strong friendship that just got stronger over the years. We remained best friends, for the decade plus that the company is being run. There's always, I think, moving into a more professional relationship, there are the realities of interacting in different ways, but for us, the strength of having a strong friendship as a foundation created a lot of trust. And I think that was really important for us throughout the years.
I think it's awesome. I think it's the interpersonal relationships. Like that's just something I was talking to somebody the other day. Humans, despite our best efforts, we still remain analog. And so our relationships, those kinds of things still need to be kind of fostered. And I think that's really cool. So kind of the high level, this transition from Happy Valley to Silicon Valley, just have some questions about what was that like and what is it like going there? So in a place and time where we see basically, I heard about Snapchat launch parties where they spend like $6 million on a party, and it's kind of opulence and kind of launch things out. You folks had in an article I was reading, run it cheap and no egos. That's very different than crazy opulent launch parties. Like what led to that kind of mentality, and how did that impact Weebly's kind of success?
Yeah, I mean, I think keeping a company grounded, especially as it grows larger and becomes more successful, is an ongoing effort, and it can be a challenge. For us, we were always coming from a very scrappy place. I think one of the things that I tell founders today, obviously, I think there's a lot of founders, especially when you think of Silicon Valley and you think of the VC business model, and and sometimes it deservedly picks up some flack for this whole raise a ton of cash and light it on fire kind of vibe. And within that context, I think a lot of founders are sort of thinking, and maybe not saying, but certainly thinking, how do I make this a successful outcome? How do I make it a successful outcome for everyone involved? For me as a founder, for the eventual team and employees I end up hiring, and the investors, sort of all the major stakeholders. I think the key to that, and this is something a lot of people don't talk about, but the key to that is capital efficient growth. So it's not that a lot of people focus especially on the raising the money part. And they say, wow, they raised a lot of money, so that was bad, right? It's not necessarily that raising a lot of money is bad. It's that, in fact, when you raise money is not what I see as when founders get diluted. It's when you spend the money inefficiently for growth is that you get diluted. And so, really it's the spending part. When you spend money inefficiently and you do it in a way that doesn't cause growth, then you're diluting yourself. Because if you spend it well, if you turned, $1 million into a much larger company, then sure, you own a little bit less of of a much larger company, but that doesn't always happen. And sometimes people raise a bunch of money and spend a bunch of money in really bad ways. And that's when you see those bad outcomes. That's when you see companies that raise $200 million and sell for $150 million or whatever. And and when that happens deservedly, there's a lot of introspection on what went wrong. And so I think for us, it was always, you know, you know, a different failure mode is to just look at the amount of money raised and say, we don't want to raise a lot of money. And so we're going to grow in a really scrappy way. And, growing in a scrappy way can be good, but if there's an opportunity in the market, you should be aggressive about capturing it. And so I think raising a lot of money can be good if you do it in a way that you know how to spend it and you spend it productively to grow the company. So we're always very focused on that. And what that meant is, I always saw being diluted is when you spend the money. And so we just didn't want to get diluted, and we wanted to spend the money efficiently.
That's wild. I mean, a couple of things that I've heard from other founders in the area was like, money is like oxygen. So you're not trying to go out and get as much oxygen as you can get. You're just enough to get you growing and going, to keep you growing and moving. So I think there's a lot of, that makes a lot of sense.
There is such a thing as oxygen poisoning.
Yes, right. You can get hyperoxia, right? There's hypoxia, and then the alternative, right? You can get too much if you don't do this, but if you just start huffing and puffing on your own, one of you will eventually pass out. So yes, no fun. Yeah, too much oxygen can be dangerous, right? Especially in the case of money. Like, we have this, now we can spend it on whatever we want. I mean, like, be careful with your finances. Can you share your experience at Y Combinator and how specifically impacted Weebly over any of the other things you could have done with that time?
Yeah, I mean, for us, Y Combinator is transformational. And I think it is for most people that go through the program. It's a different program when we went through it than it is today. When we went through, there were 12 companies. And I believe we each got 15 minutes, maybe it was somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes to pitch a demo day. I believe it was 15 minutes. These days, there's hundreds of companies, depending on the batch. And I believe they each get about 60 seconds to pitch. So it's a lot larger today, but back then it was also not as well known. There weren't some other advantages. I think the advice is probably even better today than it was back then, even though the advice was phenomenal back then. But it was transformational for us for a few reasons. First of all, everyone with good reason focuses on the money in terms of what you get from a program. I think the money, now I believe each company gets somewhere around $500,000 from YC, which is great. Back then we got 20K for 3 of us. So, when you look at like the effective run rate that we were living on, for 3 of us, luckily straight out of college, living on 20K for 4 months, that was like 20K a year each. That's hard to do in San Francisco, but not impossible. So the money itself was really transformative in that it allowed us to move from working nights and weekends to working on it full time. And I think there's a huge leap that happens there when you're able to focus, just that amount of focus. So that was huge. More important, kind of moving up the chain from least important to more important. More important, I think, was the advice. There was a lot of received or maybe passed down wisdom in the Valley from a lot of different people who've had these experiences that we did not have at that time at Penn State. And a lot more of that is now online, but a lot of it isn't. And there was certain piece of advice that just completely changed the company. I mean, we had, in our batch, one of the partners was Paul Buchheit, who was a creator of Gmail, maybe the first major AJAX sort of web application. And so we were able, I remember one dinner that we had where we were just struggling because we were building something that had never been built before in a browser. And what we're trying to do is basically build a website that made websites. And in order to do that, you had to encapsulate this HTML and CSS and JavaScript, in a way that it couldn't affect the larger application. And that was not really something anyone had ever done before. And so we're really struggling with especially how we got CSS not to leak into the larger container. And we wanted to put it in iframe, but that had other sets of challenges. Notably, it consistently and every time crashed Internet Explorer. So that one was off the table. And so we had to put it in like a div container, and we said, okay, how are we going to do this? And I couldn't quite figure out how to sandbox it. Was able to talk to Paul Buchheit over about a 15-minute conversation. We figured out how to make it happen, which was awesome. So that it's not just that type of advice, but there's lots of advice that was very, very helpful. Business advice, especially, UI and UX advice even more. But I think maybe for us, well, maybe the advice was the top one, but certainly up there was just the stamp of legitimacy was really important. We were outsiders to the Valley. We were three kids coming from Penn State. People did not want to talk to us. People did not think that anything good was going to come out of this little tiny startup. And being a part of the YC program really added a ton of legitimacy. And so I think, for us, those were the three most important things. It was a phenomenal experience. I continue to be involved now as an alum with Y Combinator and helping the companies. And so from that vantage point, get a little bit of a view of how the program operates today. And it's stronger than ever. And it's just as much value as ever. So, if anyone's thinking about applying, would highly recommend it.
That's awesome. I think that's a testament to the power of network, right? So the people are really incredible. Like being able to ask somebody, hey, we've never done this. Can you give us some insight, especially when they trust you, right? I think that's incredible.
One other plug that I'll add in here is I did with Gustav, who's a partner at Y Combinator, and myself as an alum, recently authored this request for startups for climate tech. So it's a pretty comprehensive 20-page document that gives a full overview of the entire climate tech space, and with probably 100 or more ideas for companies. So if you're even remotely curious about how you can make an impact, start a company in climate, this would be the first place to start and check it out.
Actually, I would love to jump to some climate questions I have for you specifically. Can you tell us about Leap Forward and just more details about it? And like, what drew you to that? Like, of all the things you could have done, why move in this space?
Yeah. So Leap Forward is an early stage climate tech venture capital firm. Investing typically at companies getting started at the idea stage or just very, very early on. And really started, I started it recently because I'd personally been involved in climate more broadly for about 6 years now, and we can talk a little bit about why. But really started because I saw things change pretty considerably. I had been, personally involved more on the politics and the policy side, and really helping to push for really good policy that I thought we needed. Things changed pretty dramatically last year when we got the IRA. We got a lot of things in states in California and other states. And, climate and climate tech has really changed from what it was 20 years ago. I think 20, 30 years ago, it was really about, what ways are you going to sacrifice your life to save the planet, right? And the reality is that's where we were at the time, but that's not where we're at today. Because today, this almost miracle has happened, which is that solar is super cheap. Wind is super cheap. Electric vehicles are just better vehicles. I mean, without going on too much of a tangent, I have a 6 and 3-year-old boys, and it's kind of fun to be able to, be a participant in helping shape their worldview. But those kids know that gas cars are slow cars and EVs are fast. And if we're driving down the highway and there's someone in front of us that's driving slow, my 6-year-old say, man, that slowpoke in front of us must be a gas car. I relate that anecdote just to say, these are often better products. So really now, a lot of these things are coming together in such a way that I think we're gonna make the world a considerably better place, not just because we aren't polluting harmful chemicals that harm the planet and our health, by the way, but because we are building a future of energy abundance where energy gets cheaper, where it's more available, where the electric sort of alternative products are better, they're more reliable, they're way easier to maintain, they will become less expensive over time than their gas counterparts. And so, I just think this transformative moment that we're in, that in the next 20 or 30 years, there's going to be so much positive change happening. And I personally really wanted to help get involved, not just personally, but professionally, to help bring my experience starting a company. And all the challenges of starting a company may be different, but growing an organization is going to be pretty similar. And so really wanted to try to bring some of the benefit of that experience, as well as some investments and capital to some of the most intelligent, phenomenal entrepreneurs these days are starting up companies in climate tech, and I think are going to change the world over the next 20 to 30 years.
I mean, I love that so much. I mean, I remember the moment where like reading about solar panels being cheaper than coal or cheaper than other forms of fossil fuels, and just saying there's no argument against them now. They're cheaper and they're better for the environment. So you don't have to sacrifice anything. So we'll see what's going forward. I'm very excited to hear more about it. And I'm curious about, what role do you think entrepreneurship has in solving the climate crisis or addressing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's going to have a huge, huge role to play. A lot of these technologies are now in place. You talk about cheap solar, you talk about the cost coming down, you talk about batteries, a lot of these things are going to have transformative impact, but where we're at with the climate crisis is it's about speed. It's about how quickly can we move over the next 10 to 20 years, really. And if we have a big impact and we move quickly, then I think things are going to be all right. Like, there are going to be some things that get shittier, but things are going to be all right. But if we don't move as quickly, then I think we'll be in a much tougher spot. And entrepreneurship, whenever you see massive change happening quickly in the world, that is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs, because small companies and startups are the ones that move the quickest, and they're the ones that are able to provide the solutions that are needed in the market and reap the rewards when they do. And so, all around, so much of the way that the world works today operates via some byproduct of combustion. Whether that's vehicles, whether that's buildings and the way that we cook and heat our, and cool our buildings, whether that is, whether that's airplanes, whether that's cargo ships, whether that's, industrial processes, whether that's construction, lots and lots and lots of things. I mean, the core underpinning of the economy is combustion. That's going to change, and I think that's just such a tremendous opportunity for startups to help provide those solutions and help move everything to move quickly, more quickly, and to get to a better place.
I think that's awesome. And I think you mentioned before, there's this whole wave of new climate tech technologies coming their way. I'm curious about, what are some technologies that you're watching, maybe outside of the climate space, and that you're excited about, or you're curious about how they're going to impact the world?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so we'll put climate tech aside, because I've talked about that a lot, and I could talk about that forever. But I think the other major technology, and actually I'll name two, but the major one that obviously everyone's probably thinking of in their head right now is AI. And, if you haven't played with ChatGPT-4, which was released a few days ago, would highly recommend. I mean, $20 a month is pretty steep to play with something cutting edge like that. But, honestly, it will save you more than $20 worth of time, and probably can make you more than $20 worth of money. It is, AI is moving at just the most incredible pace. It is almost hard to keep. I mean, it is incredibly hard to keep up with how quickly things are moving. And frankly, I think a bit scary to think about where things might be going. So that is the primary technology I think that everyone's thinking of. And then the other one, which was maybe a little bit more popular a couple of years ago, is just crypto and blockchain. I think crypto, I do believe that crypto and blockchain is going to have transformative impact. I do also believe that there were a lot of scams and a lot of, bidding up the tulips happening. And so some of that falling away is good. Actually, a lot of that, was somewhat exploitative and scammy. So that side of it falling away is good, and keeping the core, of what is revolutionary about decentralized digital currency, or decentralizing more things via the blockchain, I think can be powerful over time. But yeah, I mean, the main technology everyone's looking at right now is AI.
Yeah, certainly. And I think for both those technologies, AI and with like blockchain and crypto, I think time will be the filter for sure to see which ones will stand out and stand true. I have time for one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So if you have questions, generate those now. The last question I'll ask is, in an article, I remember you reading, you had two pieces of advice for budding entrepreneurs. One was get started, and the other one was don't give up. Is that still the same piece of advice you give out? If so, great. And if not, what has changed?
Yeah, absolutely. Would still be the two pieces of advice. I think my view on what makes an entrepreneur, a lot of people, I think there's this misconception that a lot of people think about entrepreneurs as risk takers. I've never seen the risk in entrepreneurship, especially as a student, as a Penn State student. I've always said the worst case scenario is that you spend the next year or two having the most transformative educational experience. You will learn the most that you'll ever learn in your whole life, and then you will also build the best resume, right? And so like the worst case scenario is that you then go join a larger company with this incredible experience that's going to benefit and propel your career. So, and obviously the best case scenario is that you spend the next 15 years working on it. But I think that the key distinguishing feature of entrepreneurs is a lot of them think like that. They're just more optimistic. So I don't think entrepreneurs, in my experience, entrepreneurs actually take as much risk or less than other people. I think they're just more optimistic when they evaluate those risks, especially around getting started. So, the reason I give these two pieces of advice is and unfortunately I'm not able to be there in person, but inevitably, whenever I'm back at Penn State, there are always these questions. Well, how do I do that? I really want to work on this idea, but I don't really know how to do it, blah, 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 blah. And do you think I should do this or this, or this, or this? And the answer is just get started on something. Yep. Because you could sit there on the sidelines and think about it all day long, but until you start working on something, and then after that, it's honestly, it sounds really stupid, but it's actually really easy. You just don't give up. You just keep working on it every day. You just make a little bit more progress. And, it always looks from the outside like someone took this giant leap across the chasm and did this really, really impressive thing. But the reality is that person just woke up every day and just did a little bit every day. It's not even like every day you have to do a lot. If you just do a little bit every day and make a little bit of forward progress every day, after some period of time, it turns out you've done this kind of crazy, incredible thing. So if you could just do those things, just commit yourself to get started, and then just keep doing a little bit more every day and one foot in front of the other, that's how you get it done.
I love that. That's amazing. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to people in the audience. So with questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to run over to you with a microphone, and then you're going to ask your question. And then David, if you have any issues, please just like flail in front of the computer. Okay. I'm going to start here, and then we'll go to you.
Hi, so I was wondering what benefits and what difficulties come with starting a business with your friends?
Good question. I would say it's more benefits than difficulties, but there are some of both. The benefits, fundamentally, the benefits are this huge layer of trust. And I think trust is one of the key ingredients to a founding team, but to any team really. And so, having the trust, to be able to just blindly work together and march in the same direction versus maybe having to look over your back with someone that you don't trust. I think that's just critically important. The drawbacks, I would say, like with any working relationship, you also don't want to, you want to continue to make the best objective decisions together. And, and this isn't just with founders, but really anyone at the company where you have a strong personal relationship, sometimes that can be more difficult. And so, it's not an impossible problem to solve. It's just something you have to be cognizant of and, all work together on.
Awesome. Another one here.
What do you think made your YC application stand out from the others?
Great question. At the time when we applied, we were a little bit further along than other people had been in terms of actually having a prototype, but still, these days, I believe it's still something like 30 or 40% of companies apply with just an idea. So it's not that you definitely don't need to have a prototype or a product or revenue or anything like that to be able to get into YC. At the time, I think we were a bit further along. The product itself was impressive. It resonated well with the YC founders. Paul Graham's first startup was was Via Web, which became Yahoo Stores. So effectively something very similar during the .com days. So I think those were possibly a few of the things that made the application stand out.
So you made the decision to leave school early and to commit to your startup full time. What would you say to students who are also thinking the same? What would you recommend someone to do if they're considering either staying in school or leaving to do their project full time? What should they consider before making that kind of decision? And when is it right to make that decision?
Yeah, asking for a friend. But in this hypothetical person, are they sophomore, junior, senior?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess.
Like junior.
Okay. I guess my answer might be a little bit different. I mean, I think if you were first and foremost, if the opportunity is there and it's an amazing opportunity, you have to take it. Now, if I was a sophomore, I would probably place a pretty high bar on what that opportunity has to look like for me to leave school, because, the reality is if you leave school as a sophomore, odds are against you in terms of coming back. I think, when you leave school and you get a little bit older, there's a lot of things that suck about getting older and leaving school. Penn State's like the best place in the world, in my opinion. But one of the things you do realize is how many like bullshit hoops there are for you to jump through. And once you don't have to do that anymore, then it becomes really hard to to come back and do that again. So, as a sophomore, I would say pretty high bar for what that has to look like. But if the opportunity is there, go take it. Junior, if you're a senior, I mean, what happened with us is we left the semester early. I was able to, I was dual majoring. I dropped one major, and then with the IST major, I believe I had 2 classes left, and I was able to just talk my way into doing those classes from San Francisco. Anything's possible. I told one of the professors, I said, look, can I see the syllabus? And he sent me the syllabus, and I said, okay, so there's no pop quizzes or anything like that on the syllabus. It's, there's a midterm and there's a final. And that's the whole grade. I said, I can't be there for I will not be there for every class, but I will be there for the midterm and the final. And I promise you I'll pass those tests. I just need you to know I'm not coming to class because I'm going to be in San Francisco. And he didn't like that idea very much, but I eventually kind of explained the situation to him. And then he actually ended up being extremely accommodating and didn't make me fly out 2 times to take the tests and all that kind of stuff. Was able to find a proctor out in San Francisco. So, I'd say if the opportunity is there and you're close to graduating, anything's possible. Just try, it's possible to talk to your professors. It's possible to figure it out. And there's possibly a way that you could do both.
Hi, so at what iteration or build did you end up launching Weebly? And at what point, I guess, assuming key features have been developed, would you suggest for somebody to actually launch their product?
Good question. So, I mean, we launched basically what I consider an early alpha. The question on when you should launch comes up often. Excuse me. My favorite answer on this one was again from Paul Buchheit, who said you should launch when what you have is better than anything else that's out there. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I would be wary of launching too late. Although maybe that's a little bit less of a risk today because there is this culture of MVP. At Square, we used to say we don't want to build MVPs, we want to build MRPs, minimum remarkable product, which I think gets down to that same, thought. So you want to get out there early. You want to start collecting feedback. Everyone, a lot of people have this idea that they know what the product, like I have this idea for what I want to build and it's going to be perfect. And I know exactly how it's going to be. And I have this vision in my head. And if I could just get it built and I launch it, then it'll take off like a weed and it'll grow from there. And I don't think any product in the history of the planet Earth has ever had that story. Typically what happens is you have an idea and you put it out there and it's like there's an interesting element to it, but not everything resonates and you iterate. And it's not usually version 1 that's successful. It's like V12, right? Through rapid iteration cycles that ends up taking off. So I think, it's useful to get it out there early. like not so early that you're not adding value to people, not so early that it's obviously worse than other things that are well known, but get it out there early enough to be able to work in public and iterate in public and get the benefit from all that, you know, usage and feedback.
David, this is Matt McKinney. I have an online question for you. Do you think there's anything about your upbringing living outside the US that fostered your entrepreneurial spirit compared to some of your peers that did not have that experience or insight?
It's a good question. You know, I always wanted to start a company from being really young, you know, maybe 10 or 12 or something like that. I think it's the coolest thing in the world. You get to be your own boss and you get to do something where you're having impact, and, you know, hopefully you get to be rewarded for that financially. And you know, I think that sense of ownership is second to none, in the sense of, you know, you work for a large company and you're asked to work the weekend, and that's a horrible feeling, right? But I think you work for yourself and your customers are hitting you over the head with a baseball bat, because literally what you put out there sucks, and they're trying to use it and they can't because it's not good enough. I mean, that's some of the most powerful motivation in the world, to work on that Saturday, and you do it by choice because it's fun. You know, same thing once you have a larger size company and a set of employees who you feel responsibility towards. So, you know, I think starting a company is one of the coolest things you can do, and one of the most rewarding things you can do. You know, for everyone's benefit, it sounds like the person asking the question knows this, but I grew up, I was born in France and Paris, and then when I was 7, we moved to Morocco, to Casablanca, and lived there until I was 18, until I moved back to go to Penn State. And so I think there was absolutely things about that experience that kind of shaped who I am, and you know, I mean, possibly disposed me towards entrepreneurship, but certainly disposed me more towards negotiation. You know, that's pretty clear. So, you know, I can't say for sure. I mean, the last thing I'll add to that in terms of the upbringing is, you know, as my dad ended up starting a K-12 school in Morocco, and I was able to watch him be an entrepreneur and kind of from the outside watch that experience, which I'm sure was a positive example in terms of, you know, seeing him do that and sort of leading by example. So, but I don't, you know, there's a lot of questions on, you know, I think, and this is a form of question on whether entrepreneurs are born or whether they're created. I don't necessarily believe that entrepreneurs are born. I think it's something that anyone can do. But certainly you want to do it for the right reasons, which is that you're being drawn into solving this problem and you can't stop thinking about it, and you just feel like you want to work on it. You know, being drawn because it looks like a glamorous job, or it looks like you can make a lot of money, ultimately not very good reasons, because the reality is you're effective with just the amount of hours you put in. You're effective. You know, dollar rate per hour is likely to not even be that high, and the glamour of being interviewed on CNBC fades when it's you washing the dishes at night when everyone's left the office. You know, so I think ultimately do it for the right reasons, which is that you want to solve a problem for people. And you want to have impact. And I think, you know, if you're doing it for those reasons, it's one of the coolest things and one of the best life experiences you'll have.
Hi, David. Did you ever have an idea that you thought it would be perfect, and then when you start doing it, it isn't what you expected? What I mean with this, for example, was Weebly your original idea in your school project?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, it's quite often that you have this idea. Usually your idea has these interesting elements to it. There's probably some insight in there, but typically that idea is not the idea that's going to be successful. and it's all about how do you get out there and collect feedback and get usage data and really understand, you know, this true feedback around the idea. I mean, a lot of people, if you ask them for feedback on your idea, they don't want to, you know, they don't want to pour cold water on your baby. So they're, you know, they're going to tell you that it's good, or they're going to tell you that that it sounds really exciting. And you know, and the reality is your idea, you know, one of the truest ways that people can vote is in the way that they decide to use or not use your product. Are they signing up for it? Are they coming back? Are they, you know, all those kind of things. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to put it out there. Your idea will be different once you observe how people interact with it. And then it's about iterating from there and just iterating very, very quickly.
My question for you is, what goals do you have that you want to achieve, and how are you going to accomplish that?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, you know, at this point in my life, I would say, obvious goal coming out of Penn State was to be able to start Weebly, and really just to be able to build the best product that we could, and help more people be successful by building a website or transacting online. And you know, I think that there's lots of, you know, more things that I wish we could do, but I'm very happy about what, you know, what that looked like, and sort of the team that continues to run that, and the people that benefit from that. So you know, I'd say these days, you know, two primary goals for me personally would just be to you know, to just be able to accelerate and help create a better energy transition. You know, it's something that is very different than consumer software, but to me is just as exciting. It feels, you know, in climate tech, it feels to me just like when I moved out to San Francisco in 2007. At that point in time, you know, tech was still reeling from a dot-com crash, just starting to bounce back. You know, everything was scrappy. There weren't these big parties or all this kind of stuff happening. You know, that's kind of how it feels like to me right now in climate tech. People are in it for the right reasons. They're in it because they're passionate about it. And there's just so many cool problems to be solved now. You know, thinking about, you know, I love buildings. I've become a bit of a buildings nerd, and, you know, how buildings can manage, you know, and consume energy differently. You know, same thing around cars, same thing around a lot of these like deeper, you know, hard tech scientific areas are just super fascinating. So, you know, in that sense, you know, hoping to be able to play a small role in accelerating that transition, but, you know, more importantly, having young kids, a 6 and a 3-year-old, I think one of the most important jobs that I could have personally is, you know, to help them grow up to be the kind of people that they want to be, but ultimately to be curious and kind and just be great human beings. And so, you know, I'd say both those things I would consider as important jobs, but probably my role as a parent the most important.
Time for, I think, 2 more questions at most.
Thank you so much, David. So my question to you is, how did you decide that you're going to sell Weebly to Square? That was the right time, the right company, and the right price?
Sure, great question. You know, like I said earlier, we both, you know, both Weebly and Square kind of looked at the market, and we're both getting a lot of feedback from our customers just around, it's great that you do online, but we really need something that integrates with our in-store as well, and, you know, vice versa. And so first of all, we were getting this feedback. We were looking at, you know, with the complexity of selling online is tremendously high. The complexity of selling in person maybe even more so. And we just knew we weren't going to be able to do both independently. So from that perspective, I think the combination made a lot of sense. One of the things that made a lot of sense about the combination too was just the cultures were so similar. You know, my biggest fear was you know, with an acquisition was effectively organ rejection, but basically, you know, this idea that the companies might not integrate that successfully. You know, at the time we was about 10% of Square, so it wasn't a tiny, you know, it wasn't tiny in terms of the number of people and making that go successful. And you know, we put a lot of work into it, and you know, the team that's running it today, I left in April of last year, and the team that's running it today is the core team that, you know, continues to run, you know, the core team that ran Weebly for a decade is also, you know, the team now running the e-commerce and online Square Online portions. And so I think, you know, all of that is certainly a factor. As, you know, as far as price is concerned, you know, I think prices, you know, obviously you just want to make sure you get a fair price, but the other thing to consider is, you know, price is contextual to a moment in time, usually derived from, you know, from public market comps in some way. We also strongly believed in Square as a company, and you know, and Square's value also has appreciated tremendously since the acquisition. So, you know, so in many ways, you know, putting the price into context is also a bet on Square as a company, and, you know, still very, very much believe in, well, you know, Block now being a large organization, but still very much believe in, you know, the mission of economic empowerment, the impact, you know, but also the future potential of the company.
David, this is Matt McKinney again. I have another question from a virtual participant. It's a two-part question. How do you go about collecting your data on feedback from your product and advancing it? And then the second part, more so, what are your thoughts on quantitative versus qualitative data?
So I'll give a relatively brief answer, and then I'll say, if you want the much longer hour-long answer, you can go to YouTube and search for product market fit and look at the talk that I gave at Y Combinator around that. So what are the ways that you collect feedback on your product? I think the single best way that you collect feedback on your product is to get people in person, ideally, but you could do it online as well, but ideally in person, sit them down at a computer and ask them to do something with your product. And then do not, like, just wallow in the agony of watching them not be able to figure it out. And you know, do not prompt them or tell them or anything like that. And, you know, and then just asking them to basically do these simple tasks, you will discover everything you need to know about UX issues. You will discover, you know, within the first 3 to 5 people that test your product. And I think that's extremely, extremely important from like a usability perspective. You know, there's other things that you obviously need to figure out that you'll need feedback for. You know, maybe there'll be some amount of market research, or maybe you want to, you know, it could be useful to have some kind of forum for, you know, people to upvote and downvote feature requests and propose improvements to the product and things like that. So, you know, I think there's lots of different ways you collect that feedback. Qualitative and quantitative, like, it's easy, you need both. Quantitative oftentimes can tell you what is happening, but not why. And qualitative can often fill in the gaps as to why something is happening. So I think you definitely need both. When you collect feedback, the other last thing I'll say is that you want to be very careful to collect feedback from the right people. So make sure you're collecting feedback. Like, I'll just say in the Weebly example, there's lots of different reasons people create websites, sometimes for education purposes, sometimes for a small business, sometimes for personal websites, you know, lots of different reasons. If you have a certain set of customers that you're targeting, make sure you're collecting feedback from those customers so that you're building the product for them and not for someone else that, you know, ultimately isn't going to be part of your target customer base.
Okay, I think, is there one more question? We have 3 minutes left. Got one more real quick question? Great. And then we'll close out, just to respect your time, David.
I can talk fast.
What are your thoughts on the idea that I've heard some investors talk about, that eventually in the long term, the marginal cost of energy and compute will eventually go down to zero? So I want to get your thoughts from the climate side on one, if you think that's going to happen, and two, how that would affect climate tech.
Okay, great question. So I'm not going to really opine on the marginal cost of compute. I don't really know exactly where that's going, but I suppose if the marginal cost of energy goes to zero, that would go a long ways in helping the marginal cost of compute go down to zero. I think when you think about, there's a couple different things that people don't always think about when they think about energy. You know, there's a lot of excitement over potential fusion breakthroughs, and people like conceptually think of fusion as free energy, which it's not. Nuclear is currently not cheaper than solar. So that, you know, one of the big, you know, from my perspective, nuclear can be great, but it also needs to be cost effective. And solar has other issues, right? Which is like nighttime is an issue. But I think, I think when you think of energy, I think the cost will continue to drop to a certain point. I don't know exactly where it goes, but probably, in the relatively near future to just like a couple cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty cheap. But the other thing a lot of people don't think about is the cost of transmitting and distributing. So transmitting basically being the big power lines and distribution being the last mile, the smaller ones. And transmission distribution can also be very expensive. It can make up anywhere from, maybe half to, in California, closer to 2/3 or 75% of the cost per kilowatt hour of energy. So, that doesn't mean that really cheap, abundant energy won't be transformative. If you could bring some of the load to, on site to the solar farm to reduce the cost of transmitting it. And there's lots of applications that can open up, like electrofuels and all kinds of things that are like a fully renewable fuel, which would be tremendously helpful in some ways. But there's a lot of things that obviously you still need to transmit that energy, and there's still going to be some really hard costs to the transmission distribution infrastructure. So maybe a bit too in the weeds, but there's my thoughts on that.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Again, a round of applause for David here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so remotely. Incredible and answering so many questions. Absolutely blown away. So thank you again. This is all recorded. So if you folks want to watch it again, hear all the amazing things, you didn't miss a beat, it will be available online. Thank you so much and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.